Hey there, gamers. I'm Jim, and this is Pruitt. And make no illusion, without exclusion, this WebDM collusion will start with the School of Illusions. Jim, illusions. What are illusions other than tricks?
So the Player's Handbook gives us a very scattered and unfocused definition of illusions. And what I found while researching for these shows is that the definitions of the spell schools in D&D have no internal consistency and very little fidelity between the actual spells that are on the list and what the spell school definition is. There are spells in almost every spell school that it's like, why is this here and not in another one?
Right.
And we're not even going to talk about why healing isn't on the necromancy spell list, but this isn't a show about necromancy.
No, we'll get to that.
We will get to that.
We'll raise it at a later date.
Right, we'll raise that subject later. Right now, we're talking about illusions, and the Player's Handbook defines illusions as spells which deceive the senses or the mind, manipulate the senses in some way, create phantom images, or as the Player's Handbook sort of cautions, that the most insidious of the illusion spells affect the target's mind directly, causing them to see something. So we can already see that illusion and enchantment have a strong overlap.
Yes.
Here, and there are going to be spells where it feels like, shouldn't this be enchantment and not necessarily illusion?
Yeah, if you're tricking the brain.
Right. How is that not a type of enchantment? And at the same time, I like that the lines between the spell schools are a little fuzzy, because I don't like the very predictable, logical, rational magic that Dungeons and Dragons has. I like the Vancian spell casting, and I like some of the spells and the way you can use them in adventures. But just overall, D&D magic doesn't feel very magical to me. It feels like more of a system of powers that fits within a rational scheme, as opposed to like the mystical force of the universe that's hard to understand and doesn't quite make a ton of sense.
Right.
So in terms of illusion spells themselves, spells that deceive the senses or the mind, we're talking like disguise self, invisibility, hypnotic pattern, spells like that, right?
Also, you got your mirror image, more of a defensive-minded spell. But when it comes to deception of the mind, it begs the question, like, are these like holograms? Are they mental projections in the mind? It's something to think about, because one leans more enchantment, one leans more like, okay, well, I can see that as an illusion.
You can see that as an illusion. You can even see it as an evocation, right? Evocation brings things into existence that did not otherwise exist. And why wouldn't light be one of those things that's being brought into existence? So even to me, like, thinking of illusion as like, okay, it's purely the manipulation of light to create these different effects, whether it's like creating a shell of transparency or reflectiveness to create an invisible creature, or manipulating light in some way to create an image that anyone can see. But then at the same time, like I said, that there's sort of blurred lines, I think, between even illusion and evocation in that respect. In terms of what you're talking about, the images that illusion creates, are they something that anyone can see? It's a hologram that exists outside of the senses of the perceiver, or is it just a hallucination projected into the mind of the target of the spell? And I think it's interesting to see, right? Like the spells that create an image, silent image, major image, even something like mirror image, any of those that have a thing that exists externally to the senses. To me, it's sort of like, all right, how does that interact with creatures that don't have a visual sense? A lot of this is just common sense. If a creature has no sight and only perceives through blind sense or something, then they might be completely immune to these sorts of spells which create an image of some kind. And then similarly with like a mental image or a hallucination, those are spells like Phantasmal Force, Phantasmal Killer, Weird is another one, even though it's not really worth a 9th level spell slot. But they are ones that project something directly into the mind. You can like Professor X someone, right? Make them see something that's not there, or perceive something that isn't, and then eventually like harm themselves through the use of this spell because they're sort of like scared or something like that. I think the hallucinations are more interesting in terms of like their story potential, the impact that they have on the game world, than like a projected image. But it's worth thinking about the difference between the two of them, and how a dungeon master would adjudicate rules based on, like, okay, I'm gonna project an image of a monster directly into someone's mind using Phantasmal Force, versus like I'm going to conjure an image of a monster using major image. What impact does that have on how the dungeon master reacts? And I think it comes down to the kind of the die rolling that affects those two. Spells that affect the mind require a save. Spells that create an image require a skill check to come along and investigate and sort of see what's going on. And that's kind of the clue as to the power and potential of these particular types of spells.
When thinking about that, how do different senses like alter the perception of, say, like silent image or major image, things like that? Like, how would a DM think about like wild animals that don't have investigation, but you're trying to like dupe a bear or something like to get by it?
This is one of the areas where dungeon masters and players see a lot of friction over the use of illusion.
Yeah.
Is how monsters and NPCs and the creatures under the DM's control react to the presence of illusions. If you go online and you look at sort of like players who are trying to play illusionists, the first thing people will tell them is check with your dungeon master first. They're one of the more DM dependent archetypes out there. I mean, summoners and other kinds of character archetypes, they're going to have a lot of minions and the like, are another one you'd want to talk to your DM with. But illusionists and casters who are going to really use illusions owe it to themselves to talk to their DM, because if you have an unimaginative DM who takes rules literally and doesn't try to work through the implications of something, isn't willing to go beyond the text of a spell to see how it might impact things, and takes that text as exhaustive instead of just a jumping off point. If you have a dungeon master like that, then playing an illusionist is probably going to be an exercise in frustration, as you're attempting to create images and illusions of things that you want the world to react to in a certain way, where the dungeon master says, well, I don't have to, the bear is going to ignore the image of the wolf that you've conjured, or vice versa, or something like that. Or these guards are engaged in mortal combat with the party. They don't care that an image of allies arriving comes up. If you don't have DMs that use morale rules, if you don't have DMs that use reaction rolls for the kinds of monsters that they have, if you don't have a dungeon master who has their enemies run away because they have every fight ever is a fight to the death, even if it doesn't make a lick of sense, then you're going to have difficulty. You're going to have difficulty there, because you might want to say scare off someone with an illusion, and the dungeon master's not going to let you. Or you're going to want to have an illusion shake the confidence of someone and give you an advantage in a situation, and the dungeon master's going to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. Talk to the DM first. Sit down with them, throw out some scenarios of how you think you'd like to use these spells, engage their reaction. And then if it's a reaction that seems like it's a lot of no, that's not how the spell works, that's not how this works, I wouldn't do it that way, then it sucks, but you might have to play a different kind of character. That's sort of like player advice in that scenario, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like when you have like, say, like major images, like 15 foot square.
Yeah.
So I mean, down a narrow alley, if you had like what looked like 9 allies running up on you, and the DM failed their investigation check, I mean, shouldn't they like look at that and be like, fuck?
I mean, even if they interacted with it in the first place to trigger the investigation check. To me, this is how I've always run them, is I've looked and see like what kind of effect is the player going for with this illusion, and asking the player directly, what do you want the outcome to be? What is the intent of summoning this image or creating this illusion? What's the point of it? Are you trying to scare someone off? Are you trying to intimidate them? Almost always it's about that. It's about stopping a fight before it can start. And particularly times when I've played an illusionist or had other illusionists in the party with me, there's or a DMing illusionist, there's a tendency to want to use the illusions in a clever way before the fight begins, as opposed to like during the fight to try to trick enemies or something. But that can happen as well, right? I've seen people use illusions to create the impression of there being like barriers of some kind that would prevent their enemies from following them or attacking them or going a certain way. But for dungeon masters, once I've kind of determined whether or not what the effect that the player wants is, then it's a matter of seeing like how is my party or how are my NPCs and whoever's with them going to react. How's this monster going to react? So use some examples. You're trying to scare off an animal. If there's no scent component to the illusion, then I'm probably going to have that animal react in a way that's sort of like, maybe they're a little scared, maybe they don't know what's going on, but it's not like, if you create an illusion of the scent of a bear, then maybe wolves are going to leave you alone. And I think like the scent of something for animals is maybe more important than the sound or the visual of it. Particularly if they have something like keen senses, the like.
Right, but I would think of that as something along the lines of, yes, they have a stronger sense of smell, so that gives them advantage on the perception check. But if they still fail a perception check, say versus the investigation DC, then they just don't, they pay more attention to what they're seeing. Like say a major image that has sight and sound, they're paying more attention to what they're seeing and hearing than the smell.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right?
I can see that. Having
And so I think
involved.
they're actually not using the tools best suited to them.
Right.
But that's because your illusion is so real, and it's a big bear trundling at a wolf, or wolves coming after a bear or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there are multiple ways to interact with an illusion, and to remember all the senses is important.
It is important, and I think like trying to figure out kind of like how your enemies react. This is why having a reaction table can be helpful, because it's something you can roll on. You can have modifiers for whatever, if these are like the elite guards, then their reactions are going to tend more towards staying in the fight and confronting who they perceive as enemies, as opposed to maybe just like scrub guards who, the minute things get difficult, are going to run away and complain to the boss.
Right. That's the
That's
rules. I need
the
to go get a
rules, right?
manager. I'll be right back.
Yeah, they're just, they're there to keep an eye on things, keep the riffraff out. Having something that provides you with a framework for how enemies will react to unseen or unexpected threats can be helpful. If your illusionist conjures an image of a spell effect, right? Like that's what I've used a lot of times as an illusionist, is like, I'm going to conjure a sphere of annihilation or a prismatic wall.
Right.
To make the people seem like I am a more powerful caster than I actually am. I wouldn't do this for casters, right? They'll see right through this shit. But for guards and the like, for people who have no idea what magic is, here's my sphere of annihilation, you guys.
If you get near me, I'm going to melt your face.
You're going to melt your face. And maybe you have like a secondary illusion going on of like it hitting something and it disintegrating a portion of it that the guards then react to. That's creating spell effects, bringing in illusions that look like monsters or bigger creatures or bigger animals or something like that. These are all scenarios where the dungeon master, you're going to have to figure out how your opponents and how the pieces you control react. And it's worthwhile to do that because you've got a player that's playing a caster that uses a lot of illusions, and they want that kind of interaction between the game world and their illusions, and they want it to be more than just like, oh, everyone knows this is an illusion. Like, really? It's going to get, I can't ever, come up with something that's going to work. I think Pruitt's suggestion of having some kind of role is probably the better way to do it, if only because I've seen a lot of arguments between players and dungeon masters where it comes down to things like, well, I think they should react like this. And the dungeon master goes, well, I kind of think they're going to react like this. And of course, both sides want the best outcome for them. And so even having something like, there's a role in there somewhere to help determine when and where these disputes, how they're resolved, can be helpful. That's sort of like just general advice for managing illusions at the table as a dungeon master is, how do they react? How does your world react to these things? Yeah.
Well, and I love the idea of recreating other spell effects with illusions, because if there is a class to do that,
right?
If people are running up on you, and you throw a fireball up in the air and then point the wand at them and go, "The next one's for you."
Right? Yeah.
Maybe that'll work.
Maybe that'll work. There have been times when I've allowed what I call pseudo damage to be for illusions to do pseudo damage. In 5th edition, I would characterize that as psychic damage that goes away pretty much immediately. It's a temporary kind of thing, and it will not kill you. At best, it will knock you out temporarily. And so pseudo damage is like, I conjure a major image of a gout of flame that's, spraying across the whatever, and it's not real, that it's not really going to harm them, but those guards might react in such a way that they take pseudo damage, and, if that temporarily knocks them out, then that's one thing, but it might only last as long as that illusion's maintained.
Yeah.
And then once it's gone, then the pseudo damage is gone.
Right.
Itself. And so there are times when I do something like that, particularly if it's like a mental illusion, where it's directly in their mind and not like a physical thing they can interact with.
I just got the image of like a bunch of guards falling over like fainting goats, just like as you're coming out of the, just like falling over.
Yeah.
Like, illusionist turns around, works every time.
Works every time as they get themselves up, and the illusionist runs away from whatever it was that they're doing. Yeah, Phantasmal Force is a fun spell for doing this. It's not the best spell. There are better spells to cast. There's even better illusion spells to cast. But if you want an illusion that's going to do actual damage, Phantasmal Force is kind of it. There's Phantasmal Killer, but I'll be perfectly honest, that requires 2 saves and is really weak. And Weird, which is just mass Phantasmal Killer, suffers from the same problems that Phantasmal Killer does, and the fact that it's not Wish.
There's also Shadow Blade. You're conjuring a shadow weapon as opposed to creating an illusion of some crazy who knows what.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where I find like the inclusion of the Shadowfell and Shadow Magic under the umbrella of illusion to be a poor fit, because I would rather personally kind
of like Conjuration a bit.
It's right. You're pulling things from other planes and drawing things out. Creation is the same way. We'll get to oddballs later on in the episode, but anything which like pulls something from another plane and creates something out of it, to me, is conjuration, because the Shadowfell has the theme of deception and the night and shadows and hiding and sort of as illusion. I think thematically, shadow magic and illusion get coupled together.
Yeah.
But I see shadow magic as just as viable as under necromancy as well as conjuration, right? Like there's thematic elements that connect it to necromancy. So, but Phantasmal Force is if you want to create a mental image in someone's mind of anything that does damage, Phantasmal Force is it. And if I were running a game for an illusionist or someone who's going to be casting a lot of Phantasmal Forces, then I would consider beefing up the spell. At the very least, letting it do more damage if you upcast it from a higher level slot, and probably bringing the damage it does more in line with single target second level spells like, say, Scorching Ray, even though Scorching Ray can target multiples, but something like that, if only because a d6 of psychic damage is just kind of...
For a second level spell?
I'm saying at least 3d6. Come on.
I don't think that's going to break the game.
I don't think it's going to break
They still have a save to avoid it, and it's only one character.
To me, the big problem with Phantasmal Killer is it requires 2 saves. I don't think it should require 2 saves. I think it should just be 1 and done, and I also think it should go back to killing you. Right?
Well, I mean, like, Jim, what's in a name?
It causes your heart to stop, and then if you pass the save, you take some damage.
In a game where Cold Touch does necrotic damage, should Phantasmal Killer really kill?
I think so. Yeah, I do. In the same way, like Finger of Death should kill you in Death Spell. I like save or die effects.
It's all part of the 5th edition nerfing. And
it is.
We've talked about it.
It is. Illusions are fun, right? Like, people play illusionists and illusion-using casters because they want that creativity. They want to do weird things. Of course, the illusionist itself offers a lot of really cool opportunities to further enhance your illusions, but I think just the spells themselves are fun, and having a good understanding, the Dungeon Master having a good understanding of how his world works, and how targets interact with the illusions, is going to help them adjudicate these edge cases where the player's like, all right, hear me out. I'm going to create this big thing. And this is what I'd like. Players, be sure to let the Dungeon Master know what effect you are going for when you're crafting your illusions.
And I think be descriptive as possible, because even something as simple as like the cantrip Minor Illusion.
Right.
You can get away with quite a bit if you're descriptive enough. I mean, you can come up with a Metal Gear box.
Sure.
I mean, you're like, I'm going to put a box over me, so they're running down here. I'm underneath a wooden box.
Creating cover with the one illusion cantrip that exists.
That was going to be my follow-up question. I was like, really, just one? The only illusion here is the illusion of balance between spell schools.
There is no illusion of balance. Even that's a lie. Minor illusion, of course, for a lot of casters, minor illusion is very useful for creating cover. Of course, for an illusionist wizard, it does double duty with both sight and sound, and becomes a really potent cantrip in that respect. But like even something like a high elf thief that has minor illusion, as opposed to say mage hand or message or prestidigitation, which tend to be popular picks for those. Minor illusions there is like I can create cover. Like when do I this will always be useful. It gets really fun with the illusionist ability to like make a part of your illusion real, because then you've got minor illusion, doesn't require concentration, you just do it and make it real. I would let players do minor disguise self type effects with a minor illusion. Give themselves different distinguishing characteristics, change the color of their hair, change the sound of their voice temporarily. Like those are the kinds of things I might let a minor illusion do. Not a full-on disguise self level, certainly not as long, but things like that.
Give yourself a beard.
Sure, give yourself a beard, that kind of thing. Give yourself a girlfriend with your minor illusion.
This is my waifu.
Right.
Sorry.
This is
really just a body pillow with
2D
some
waifu. I think that creating a cantrip that is an offensive illusion cantrip would be interesting. And I think this leaning into the blurriness between evocation and illusion is the way to go here. Personally, for me, if it was me, I would take Vicious Mockery and just completely reskin it. And it
does psychic damage.
Yeah, it does psychic damage, it imposes disadvantage, and maybe you have like a Dazzle Burst or something. You'd be like Jubilee or Dazzler from the X-Men, and like it's a short range. Maybe it just does like 5 feet somewhere around you, like you just blast a blast of sound and light into a creature's face, and then they does some psychic damage, disadvantage for their next attack, that kind of thing. Or maybe make it like Shocking Grasp, and it's like a blast in their face, and it sort of like temporarily blinds them. You can run away without them.
Yeah, no reaction.
No reaction to get that attack of opportunity. So those are things I might add in terms of illusion cantrips, just to fill things out and to give that illusionist a little minor combat spell to get them out of a tight spot.
Kind of to go back to like interacting with how illusions are interacted with by people.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting is invisibility, and how it interacts with like being hidden from someone, and like what that should mean. And the way it is.
A lot of particularly players want invisibility to be like full stealth mode.
Yeah.
You can't see anything. You've got to detect the fumes from my exhaust port, kind of.
Like an infrared camera and watching people fart?
Or like maybe just have a dog that can smell.
Yeah. Get that keen senses,
right.
Smell.
First off, determining how your invisibility works is one of those things that can be fun to do. Does it create a being where light does not bounce off of them, and therefore passes through them? Nothing's reflected back to the eyes of the perceivers, etc., etc. Of course, we then get into the problem of then there's no eyeballs on the invisible creature to
be able to
light
see.
to be able to see.
But
so magic must account for that in some way. You could do the kind of like predator cloak, sort of if they're perfectly still, and or there's a lot of noise in the background, you might not see them. But if you can get them against, say, a pattern or something that you can easily see their outline, that represents, say, successfully succeeding on a perception check to spot an invisible creature. You still have the disadvantage to hit them, you still have the whatever, they're still invisible. You can't target them with spells, things like that, but you might know where they are. But this is sort of the important thing. You're just unseen when you're invisible.
Yeah.
And that comes with a set of advantages for it. You have advantage to attack people. People have disadvantage to hit you. You cannot be targeted by spells that require, that they be able to see their target. The question that I have, number one, what are the different ways in which you can spot an invisible character? Whether that's Pruitt's tried and true trick of using a bag of flour for spotting invisible, antiquing
the shit out of them. Just throw flour everywhere.
Do things that stick to the invisible character? Are they a part of the invisibility spell? You know, if they're not, then maybe something like rain or fog or flour or some particulate matter in the air that can be used to sort of detect disruptions in it would detect an invisible creature. Something thrown on the ground that you can see footprints on. So like it'd be difficult to be an invisible creature in, say, like the sand or something like that.
Throw a bag of pennies at them.
Sling all of your copper pieces in
Always, well,
where you think they are.
it should be your pouch out front anyway, in case people want to steal.
Well, number one,
right?
You should have a bag of fake money on your belt that people can steal, or that you can drop that certain monsters might pick up.
Right.
You trick them.
Yes, and then also when you're fighting someone, they go invisible. You just fan that out.
Yeah.
And you watch where the pennies hit and fall.
Watch the things that fall. Right. Yeah.
It's like throwing money around.
Right. So that's sort of some things to consider when using invisibility specifically. Obviously, greater invisibility. I have always perceived the two of them as invisibility is like the predator cloak.
Yeah.
Right. Once the illusion is broken by drawing attention to the caster. You know, in older editions, it was like just about anything. And like I remember second edition invisibility kind of sucked because it was like if you opened a door, you know, you would be visible. Right. It was not very. You really just had to walk around. You couldn't do anything else.
You can breathe, but not too fast.
Right. As opposed to like old school D&D invisibility, which was like, as long as you don't cast a spell or attack, this will never end.
Yeah.
And you are invisible indefinitely. Very fun way to explore a dungeon.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I think you would start to go crazy if you were invisible for too long.
For too long.
Like, it's like a whole sensory deprivation.
The most Mithras did was 3 days. He spent 3 days invisible. Include part of that he was knocked out. He
got knocked out invisible and nobody found him.
Nobody found him. It was a lifesaver, really, because he got knocked out in just a random corridor of the dungeon. Poison gas trap. But like in 5th edition, you know, invisibility is what, like 10 minutes? It's not that particular long of a spell. I perceive greater invisibility as like they've gone cloaked, right? We cannot see them, you know, and now you're having to listen for breathing. You're having to listen for footsteps. The invisible character, in both cases, needs to make a stealth roll in order to be hidden. Hidden is the condition under which you cannot be perceived at all. Invisibility is just the point at which you cannot be seen. And so like stealth-based characters with invisibility, we have a house rule where we give them advantage on their stealth. You might not, like, you know, Pruitt was saying, maybe it was a different show, and I'm remembering actually, of like sneaking around the forest, and it's like you might be unseen, but you're heard.
Yeah.
Same thing there.
So as far as illusions go, we've mentioned like there's a couple of oddballs in here.
Spells the Dungeon Master is going to want to think about.
Like a good hard think. Phantom Steed.
Okay, Phantom Steed. Why? First off, why is it not conjuration?
Why is it not conjuration?
Why is it not conjuration?
That's my question. You are literally conjuring a phantom steed, which in the description it does say, you know, you can conjure phantom creatures.
Sure.
But when I think phantom in that way, I'm thinking like phantasmal force. Something to scare you and hurt you. Like, this is like, yeah, I'm going to create like a real thing that's not really there.
Right. Or you could reskin it to be like Ghost Steed, and it's like a necromancy spell that summons a spectral mount. Those are the two ways I would take it. Phantom Steed is a lot like Creation, is a lot like, sort of less so like Shadowblade, in which, you know, you're drawing something from another plane and creating something with it. Gosh, that sure sounds like conjuration.
I mean, it does.
I mean, I understand that shadow casting and shadow magic is connected with illusion in the lore of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's one of those things that the inconsistency of the definition sort of gets to me. So I find Phantom Steed an oddball spell, even if I like it, right? Like, it's a useful spell in some situations. If you need a long-term mount, not a bad one to have. I just really like the mount spells and the Phantom Steed spells from earlier editions, where it's like first level conjures you a mount that you can ride around on. Yeah, it's an oddball. Fear is another one, right? Fear is an illusion spell, which is like, why is this not enchantment?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're messing with their. Anyway,
right? Yeah. Unless what you're doing is like, you know, there are some illusion spells. Phantasmal Killer imposes frightened with one of its saves, one of its 2 saves, and I would say that you could get similar effects from Phantasmal Force. But I might even let like a Major Image or something, you know, a context appropriate, impose fear. So I think fear is an oddball. Magic Mouth is an oddball as well. Magic Mouth is like, it delivers information, so it's like you could conceivably see it as a divination type spell, but at the same time it also alters the environment that it's in. So how is it not transmutation? For one, Magic Mouth is just a weird spell, and I usually use it just as a DM to taunt the players.
Yeah, it's just it's
That's
like
what I use it for.
the players are going in on the bad guy's lair, but he knows they're coming, so he leaves a Magic Mouth spell behind on a cardboard cutout of himself.
Right.
Like, you thought you were going to find me today.
Yeah.
Not so.
Not so.
Maybe next time.
You use Magic Mouth to taunt the party without having to worry about them interrupting your dungeon or your villain's monologue.
You know the best casting of that ever, I think, is it was science fiction, but in Serenity,
Okay.
guy killed me with a sword mouth.
Yeah.
Like that's basically Magic Mouth.
Yeah, that's
Like,
basically
that's,
Magic Mouth.
That's a way to
that's
use
how
that.
I've used it in the first season of Save or Dice. There's
Yeah.
a Magic Mouth of the dying caster. You know,
Yeah.
what's the last thing I can do to alert my allies? Well, they're going to find my body here. I will cast a Magic Mouth to deliver a message once they find my body. Of course, we have mentioned creation. Why creation is not conjuration, I have no idea. You are literally creating objects out of nothing. There's a class ability for the conjurer that lets them create small objects out of nothing. That's like, why is this spell? And again, it's because we're pulling on the shadowy substance of the Shadow Veil to create it, so it must be an illusion. Even though the Shadow Veil seems to be more necromancy focused than illusion. It's just, we either embrace the inconsistencies in the spell schools, or you go through every spell and rearrange them and put them into different schools. However much work you want to do.
Yeah, we're just here picking them
We're just gonna pick
apart.
it apart.
Because that's the whole point of this. What are some awesome combos that you like to use in the illusion school?
I think my favorite use for an illusion spell is Major Image, used to create an image of the party walking. And you put it at the extreme extent of the Major Image range, and you have the image be the party walks forward as long as the spell lasts. And you use it as a decoy. You use it to set off ambushes that your enemies might be preparing for you. You use it to it's not like a scout ahead, but you can trigger something. And again, this requires the dungeon master to have an idea of how their NPCs react, how the monsters react. Would the enemies react to a Major Image, which is a 3rd level spell? It's not just sight, it's all these other categories that go along with it. And if it comes from an illusionist themselves, eventually it can change as long as the illusion's there, right? If you cast it at higher level spell slots, it's permanent. A Major Image is a very versatile spell, and one of the better 3rd level spells to take beyond like the big ones, like you gotta have Fireball. So Major Image is fun, and you knew that Fireball's a good spell. Every wizard should have it. It's a fucking awesome spell, and your illusions will be all the more potent if occasionally you drop a Fireball on someone, right?
Well, if you fake it every now and again, and people are like, because that's when you're like, oh, he always does this. It's not real.
Boom. Right.
Never doubt me ever.
Right. The illusions work best when they are mixed with other spells, so that an illusion is about deception. So why would you always do the same thing? You should seek to trick your enemies, to weave subtle magics that will keep them on their toes. I really like Nistel's Magic Aura, even though as an illusion spell, it kind of is. I can see where they're coming from with it. I can also see it being some other kind of magic, maybe abjuration. This is kind of protective in nature.
I mean, you are deceiving the intent of something. You are masking it.
But it's like 30 days of casting it makes it permanent until dispelled. And so it's one of those where if my caster has it, then you're going to bet they're casting it on every magic item that they have. That they are casting it on their spell books and their magic items.
Just a dude.
And then once they're done with that, it's like, I'm going to cast it on myself, so that magic that I cast on myself will be masked. And then, of course, you can cast on yourself so that you register as a completely different being, right? So you don't set off, say, Glyphs of Warding. Nistel's Magic Aura and Glyphs of Warding are like one of the few areas where alignment comes into play in 5th edition. So you can, like, mask your alignment with Nistel's Magic Aura. You can mask your creature type. There's a lot of fun things you can do with it. In terms of like other spells, though, there's some powerful illusions. Mirage Arcana, which creates, first of all, over a phenomenal. It's like it's a ridiculous area of effect. Lasts for 10 days. No concentration. You can completely alter the features of the area of effect that it's in. And if you're an illusionist, you can then change it as long as the spell lasts, you can sort of like use an action to sort of change the features of it. So Mirage Arcana is a spell where it's like, well, shit, there's a mountain range in the way. I'm going to cast this spell, and now it is a flat, featureless road, and we're going to walk around it. And we got 10 days to get through this area, and then it's going to be fine. Or you do the opposite, where it's like, man, we're being pursued by enemies, and we cannot, we can't shake them. Well, I'm just going to Mirage Arcana mountain range in their way. They're just going to have to deal with it for 10 days unless they can dispel it. And so it's things like that. When you think about Mirage Arcana cast in a dungeon, and the area of effect that Mirage Arcana covers, and then you start figuring out the square footage of your dungeon, you can see that like a single casting of this spell might be all that you need for the villain to completely throw off the party. A lich illusionist or something, that their dungeon changes all the time in an attempt to confuse and stall the party. And then it's the party's job to kind of like find their way through this ever-shifting illusionary maze as doors are thrown up that were not there before, that are there now, that lead to nowhere, or doors that were there are covered over in illusory walls that are, for all functional purposes, real. It's a powerful spell that is, on the one hand, not very well thought out in terms of its impact on your game world, but is the potential for shenanigans is high with Mirage Arcana.
Well, also because, I mean, if you throw in maybe some programmed illusions or
Right.
some upcast
major images, right.
to throw those in there to give it some depth.
Yeah.
I mean, you got multiple illusions going, but
Yeah.
you can really start effing with some people. You can create a whole town that's just not there.
That's just not
The
there.
town of Rockridge. It's just not there.
It's just not there. It's just an illusory town.
Yeah.
And you start getting... these are the times where I'm like, I go back and watch like holodeck episodes on Next Gen.
Oh my god, yeah.
Because the things that they get up to there are sort of like, that's illusionist fodder, right? Particularly at this level of illusion. You know, you combine this with, say, like the Keen Mind feat, and your illusions are perfectly detailed. Say with the Keen Mind feat, impose disadvantage on any investigation checks done to try to discern whether these are illusions or not. They've surpassed the uncanny valley. You know, they've gone to the other side of it.
James Cameron is an illusionist.
Right.
Never thought of it that way.
Feature in The Witcher 3, one of the DLCs, where Geralt has to go into an illusory demi-plane that was created for a princess. So it's filled with fairy tale characters and fairy tale logic and that kind of thing. But it reminded me of the book A Young Lady's Primer from Diamond Age.
A Diamond Age or a Young Lady's Illustrated Primer.
Oh, Young Lady's Illustrated Primer, where it's sort of like a sentient, in this case it's a science fiction sort of nanotech sort of thing, but you could convert that into D&D and other fantasy RPGs by having it be like a sentient magic item that's meant to serve as a tutor and instructor and a governess for a child that eventually creates an illusory demi-plane that they can inhabit and play in, which then maybe, you know, it's a fun magic item in the DLC of The Witcher 3. You know, you're there for other purposes, but it's a fun use of it, and I've always wanted to include it since I played through that.